Spock gets horny. Like really, really horny. That's it. That's the episode. It's Amok Time. Hit it.
Hey!
Three major guest stars this week. As Vulcan guy Stan, we got Lawrence Montaigne. He was raised in Rome, but he was born in Brooklyn. I think I went to school with his cousin. He started his show business career as a stunt fencer and a dancer, and went on to show up in shows like Hogan's Heroes, Time Tunnel, an episode of Outer Limits where he starred with William Shatner, 8 episodes of The FBI, and we've already seen him on Star Trek once. But probably his biggest role was as Haynes in charge of diversions in The Great Escape. Not bad. Next, as Spock's bride-to-be to Pring, we got Arlene Martell. She was nicknamed by casting directors the Chameleon because of the wide range of accents and ethnicities she could play. She was in that Harlan Ellison-written episode of The Outer Limits, The Demon with the Glass Hand, and she did 5 episodes of Hogan's Heroes as French Resistance contact Tiger, and was the witch Malvina on 2 episodes of Bewitched. She also went out with James Dean for a couple of years. She was actually almost on Star Trek twice already. She auditioned for the role of Elizabeth Dana in Where No Man Has Gone Before, and also went out for the role of Sylvia in Cat's Paw. She says they told her that she didn't get that part, but they were saving her for another role later, and this one is it. Definitely got the better episode of the 2 on that one. And last, but certainly not least, as Vulcan matriarch to Pow, we've got the wonderful Celia Lovsky. Austrian by birth and trained at the Royal Academy of Arts and Music in Vienna, after moving to Berlin for her stage career, she fled Germany as the Nazis were seizing power in 1933 with her then-husband, Peter Lorre. Yeah, that Peter Lorre. The couple moved to Hollywood but divorced in 1945. She was in such classic films as Soylent Green and A Man of a Thousand Faces and Foxfire, both of which was directed by episode director Joe Pevney. And she did guest roles in shows like Alfred Hitchcock Hour, Dragnet, One Step Beyond, and The Twilight Zone. But enough about that, let's get into the plot. We open the episode with Kirk wanting to shed a couple of pounds, so he's taking the triangular ladder instead of the turbo lift. McCoy comes up and asks him if he's noticed Spock acting hinky. Kirk don't think so, but McCoy says he's kind of got the fidgets and he ain't eaten. Like 3 days worth of not eating. Kirk is like, Spock's a weird cat. He does crap like that. Just then, Nurse Chapel shows up with a tray of food, but sees McCoy and Kirk and tries to sneak off before they see her, but too late. McCoy calls her over and asks what she's doing. She says she's taking some food to Spock since he ain't been eating. McCoy takes a look and it's Vulcan plummeek soup. He's a little patronizing about it, but lets her take it into Spock, whose quarters are right next to him. While she's in there, McCoy is talking about how Spock threatened to snap his neck earlier, and as Kirk is agreeing that is unusual, Chapel runs out of Spock's quarters, barely dodging a bowl of soup as it smashes against the bulkhead. Spock comes out yelling, but seeing the captain, collects himself a bit and then asks for some extended leave on his home planet of Vulcan. Kirk is like, why is one of the walls on my ship suddenly plummeek purple there, Spockles? Spock is like, hey, I want to go home. You okay with that or what? Then he somehow slams the automatic door. After the opening credits, Spock is in a timeout, and Kirk is demanded to know what the hell is up with his boy. Why does he want leave all of a sudden when he's never wanted it before, and why does he want it so belligerently? Spock's like, can't tell you. Well, then we're heading to Altair, and they have a great bowling alley, so you'll just have to make do. Spock demands that it be Vulcan, and we see that he's holding a shank behind his back. He's like, dude, I can't tell you more than I need rest. Like, rest. Like Vulcan kind of rest. I need some Vulcan rest, Captain, you dig? Kirk calls up Sulu and tells him to set course for Vulcan. Spock thanks him, and after Kirk leaves, we see that Spock's got to shake something fierce. But at least he didn't shank the captain, you know? Later on the bridge, Kirk gets a message from Starfleet that they have to go straight to Altair 6 because the ceremony they were supposed to be there for has been moved up a week. Kirk apologizes to Spock about not being able to go to Vulcan until afterwards, and Spock says he understands, but I don't know if he's being entirely truthful about that. We cut to later in Kirk's quarters where he's trying to get a nap, but the Spock thing is bugging him too much. He calls up to Chekhov to ask how behind schedule they'd be if they really floored it to Vulcan and slowed down just enough to let Spock tuck and roll as they flew by and then booked it to Altair. Chekhov is like, I don't understand the question. We're already heading to Vulcan, and Spock is stretching and practicing his tuck and roll technique as we speak. He says he wanted me to release the mallet. I think he meant put the hammer down, but Kirk says, oh, right, yeah, I remember now. Yeah, thanks. Up on the bridge, Kirk is in his disappointed third-grade teacher stance, not one he pulls out often, and tells Spock he wants to see him in private. In the turbo lift, he says, what gives with giving the order to change course back to Vulcan? Spock says he don't know what he's talking about. Kirk starts to argue, but Spock stops him and says, no, I don't doubt I did that, but I don't remember nothing about it. Probably ought to lock me in a box or something, because if I'm doing crap I don't remember doing, I know I'm going to say something about Scotty's weird hairdos lately, and that's going to make game night awkward. Kirk is like, okay, how about this? Since you're doing weird stuff and don't want to talk about it, go see McCoy and maybe he can figure this out. Well, he does, and McCoy shows up in the captain's quarters all, we got to get this guy to Vulcan with a quickness. Kirk's like, why? McCoy says, I don't know, Spock won't tell me, but this guy's system is overclocked like a 486, and if we don't get him to Vulcan in a week, he's going to burn out, catastrophically. So Kirk goes to Spock's quarters and says, okay, furnace boy, what the hell gives? Knock it off with the secrecy, this is me here. You know I ain't going to tell nobody nothing, now spill it. And there's some back and forth, but Spock finally reveals that it has to do with Vulcan biology. Kirk's like, you mean like the biology of Vulcans? Like the Vulcans have a biology and that biology is what this has to do with? Like you mean biology is what we're talking about and the specific kind of biology that is the subject of this conversation is Vulcan in nature? Like as a Vulcan, I'm really friggin' horny, okay? Kirk's like, oh, okay, that's a little TMI there. Spock says, look, you know how salmon on your Earth have got to return to the place they was hatched to spawn? It's like that. Only this urge to mate drives us friggin' insane. Oh, we like to act like it's all traditional and ceremonial with all these rituals and whatnot, but it boils down to, you know, this whole emotionless and logical thing we got going here? Well, there's a price, and this is it. Kirk is like, enough said, we're heading to Vulcan. Sometimes even Spock's got a Kirk. Later in McCoy's office, Kirk calls up to Uhura and gets her to call up Starfleet Command and forward it to him there. We cut to Spock noodling around on his Vulcan lyre when Uhura calls up and tells him that they're working on getting Starfleet's permission to head to Vulcan, but he is, less than thrilled about being disturbed. In McCoy's office, Admiral Comac is on the phone and says, no way, the Altair thing is too important. It's the end of a civil war, yada yada, and you won't even tell me why this is so important, so no, go there, screw Spock. McCoy says, so that's it? Kirk is like, the answer is no, I am therefore going anyway. I mean, why not? I'm sure this is the only time I'm gonna have to make this kind of decision. He calls up to Chekhov to plot a course to Vulcan, but our boy's way ahead of him and has already got it ready to go. Chapel goes into Spock's quarters to let him know that they're headed to Vulcan. There's some weird sexual tension in the air, and Spock asks her to make him some soup, if you know what I mean. But she ends up actually making him soup, so probably a lost opportunity there. They make it to Vulcan, and Kirk and McCoy are going up to the bridge with Spock, and while they're in the turbo lift, Spock says this is all very Vulcan and secret, but he'd like Kirk to join him as his buddy. But then he also asks McCoy to join him too. McCoy is touched. When they get to the bridge, they've got Vulcan on the phone and they ask if Spock is there, and when he says he is, they're like, hold on, someone wants to talk to you. Then on the screen, a Vulcan lady appears, and they share some ritual words and whatnot, and Uhura asks who she is. Spock says, oh, that's my wife, T'Pring. Everybody's like, what? But we don't get to see the fallout of that because we go to commercial. When we come back, we're on the surface of Vulcan, and Spock and his wingmen are beaming down, but, of course, Kirk's out in front. Vulcan is mostly dirt and a red sky. A lot like Tucson. I'm told. They walk into a kind of Stonehenge-looking place that has a big coffin-shaped gong in the middle. Spock says it's his family's land. They've had it for 2,000 years. This circle is where they do the Kun Oot Kalafi, but his uncle's got a potty barge on the pond over there where they do the Beer Oot barbecue. As Spock goes over to bang the gong and hopefully get it on, McCoy asks about that Kun-Ut thing. Kirk says it supposedly means marriage or challenge. Vulcans used to have to kill to win their women. I'm sure that's all old stuff and people don't do that no more, though. Spock smacks the gong, and while they're waiting, Spock says that he ain't really married to T'Pring yet, but that they was promised to one another when they was 7. So this is going to be the rest of that arrangement. Then we hear the wedding party arriving. First we got some jingle bells Vulcans, and then a sedan chair with someone Kirk calls T'Pau, the only person to turn down a chair in the Federation Council. Apparently Spock's some kind of Kennedy or Rockefeller or something over here. Then you got T'Pring, then some dude who looks like that rich kid from the Romulan ship in Balance of Terror, and then some big dudes with axes and stuff. You know, like you'd expect on Vulcan. They set T'Pau down, and she and Spock exchange gang signs, and then she mind melds with him. Then she's like, what gives with the round ears over here? Spock explains that they're his ride or dies, so bite me. She's like, all right, let's see 'em. Spock intros the guys, and she says, I'll allow it, but if they break something, that's on you, Spocko. All right, get on with it. As Spock goes to bang the marriage gong, T'Pring stops him and shouts, Calafee! McCoy mumbles that he could go for an iced mocha Calafee right now, but Kirk asks what happened. T'Pau says T'Pring is choosing the challenge. Spock goes off and gets in some kind of horn dog fugue state, which, by the way, is an excellent ska band if you've never heard them. And T'Pau says that T'Pring has got to choose a champion, and that guy and Spock got to fight for her. Kirk spots the tall dude, what's the only other Vulcan not wearing a helmet, identifying him as a principal, and asks McCoy if he thinks Spock will be able to beat that guy. McCoy don't think so, with Spock being all like he is and whatnot. T'Pau tells T'Pring to choose her champion, but instead of choosing that guy, she chooses Kirk. What the hell? The tall dude is caught off guard too. He tries to protest, but T'Pau shuts his ass up. Spock calls T'Pau over and tries to tell her to forbid Kirk from doing the thing because he don't know what he's getting into, but she don't want to hear it. Kirk asks what happens if he declines, and T'Pau says T'Pring will choose a new guy to do it. He and McCoy huddle up, and McCoy tells him to decline, but Kirk says, hey, you said he can't handle that other guy. Kirk says he can just knock Spock out without really hurting him, and while McCoy refrains from reminding Kirk what happened the last time he squared off with Spock and how Spock nearly beat Kirk to death with a shelf, and that was Spock on happy spores, he does point out that it's like 900 degrees and the air is thinner than an Aldebaran really, really thin thing. Kirk says, no, if it gets too bad, I'll just quit. And besides, I can't back out in front of T'Pau. She's like the heart and soul of Vulcan. T'Pau asks Kirk to make a choice, and he chooses to fight. The Vulcan helmet squad brings out the Lurpa, which turns out is a big stick with a crescent moon blade on one side and a big metal whacking knob on the other. T'Pau says if they both survive the Lurpa, then they'll move on to the On Woon. Kirk is like, I'm sorry, if both survive? She's like, oh yeah, didn't I mention this is to the death? Okay, have fun. Round 1, fight. Well, they fight, go back and forth. Spock gets a good swipe on Kirk, cutting his shirt open, go figure. And they fight until T'Pau calls the round over. McCoy protests that Kirk ain't used to the air, and he asks if he can juice him up with a triox compound to compensate for the oxygen depravity he's having. She allows it, and McCoy shoots him up. T'Pau calls for the On Woon, and the helmet boys bring 2 white ribbons with weights on the ends. Kirk is like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? Gift wrap his ass? Spock answers by boloing Kirk's legs and yanking him onto his ass. Round 2, fight. They tussle and grapple back and forth a bit until Spock gets his On Woon around Kirk's neck and chokes him until he goes out. At this point, it looks like Spock is having some post-Pon-Farr clarity and can't seem to believe what he just did. McCoy runs over and examines Kirk and pronounces him dead. McCoy tells Spock he's in command and asks for orders. Spock tells McCoy to beam up with the captain's body and have Chekhov plot a course for the nearest starbase so as he can turn himself in for murder. McCoy and dead Kirk beam up. Spock asks T'Pring what gives with choosing Kirk. She says she wanted Stan, the tall guy. Spock is like, but I'm better. That ain't logical. She's like, you're famous and I ain't about that life. I chose your boy because if he won, he wouldn't want me and I'd be with Stan. If you won, you'd be cheesed off and made you kill your buddy and you wouldn't want me and I could be with Stan. It was a Stan scenario. Spock's like, okay, I gotta admit, that's pretty smart. He flashes the Vulcan gang sign to T'Pau and he pieces out back to the Enterprise. Spock goes into McCoy's office and tells him he's going to resign, turn himself in, and give command over to Scotty. Kirk sneaks up behind him and goes, "Boo!" Spock freaks out for a second, all happy he didn't kill his buddy and whatnot, and then gets his Vulcan feet back under him and asks, "What gives?" Kirk says McCoy shot him up with some stuff that simulated death. It wasn't a triox compound after all. McCoy sends Chapel out and then asks what happened with T'Pring. Spock says nothing kills the sexual mood like ritualistically murdering your best friend. Ain't that the truth? We roll credits. Great stuff. So much great stuff in this episode. A lot of what makes this episode so great we're going to cover in the Ruminations section, but for now, let's hit some of the great lines in this thing. It wouldn't be good to just put the whole friggin' script in here, so I'll keep it to the top 5. Or 6. Or, 8 or so.
By tradition, the male is accompanied by his closest friends.
Thank you, Mr. Spock.
I also request McCoy accompany me.
I shall be honored, sir.
A perfect example of the respect Spock and McCoy truly have for one another, despite all the bickering and whatnot. Elsewhere in this episode, Kirk tells Spock that he's been called the best first officer in the fleet. It was actually called that by McCoy in Operation Annihilate. It's great to see that differences though they may have, when the chips are down, they've got one another's backs.
What we are about to see comes down from the time of the beginning, without change. This is the Vulcan heart. This is the Vulcan soul. This is our way.
Celia Lovsky simply steals this whole friggin' episode. She absolutely kills it. I can't say enough about her portrayal of T'Pau, and I really wish we had seen her again in the series. She serves not only as the arbiter of the Kunut Caliphate, but as the kind of translator for Kirk and McCoy, and of course us, of all of the Vulcan language, custom, and ritual that we're witnessing. And she handles all the crazy moon language with ease, making it sound perfectly natural. Nimoy tells a story of how she had some trouble with the Vulcan salute and kind of had to have her hand in that position already before she whipped it out, but with the rest of it, she was a natural.
And I can't let Spock die, can I, Bones? And he will, if we go to Altair. I owe him my life a dozen times over. Isn't that worth a career? He's my friend.
We haven't really had a heart-to-heart between Bones and Kirk in a minute, and this is a good one. This line really drives home the close relationship that Kirk feels for Spock and just where he puts Spock in his list of personal priorities.
How do you figure it, Chekhov? First we're going to Vulcan, then we're going to Altair, then we're headed to Vulcan again, and now we're headed back to Altair.
I think I'm going to get spacesick.
These guys are kind of regulated to a lower decks kind of role in this episode where we see how the big story is affecting the rank and file, and it really works in this episode. Takei and Koenig have a really good chemistry, and I love it when the show takes advantage of that.
It is said, thy Vulcan blood is thin. Are ye Vulcan, or are ye human?
At his lowest point, Spock is still getting crap about being half human. This is a good look at just what Spock has to deal with from his own people and the understandable reason he prefers Starfleet and being in the almost exclusive company of humans than being at the Vulcan Science Academy where he'd have to hear this crap all day. We'll come back to this kind of character dynamic with Worf in the Next Generation. Like Worf with his Klingon heritage, Spock is proudly and steadfastly Vulcan when among humans, but he's seen as inadequately so by the very Vulcan society he venerates internally. It's such a sad internal struggle, and it really gives a lot of retroactive context to Spock's breakdown in the Naked Time.
She is yours. After a time, you may find that having is not so pleasing a thing after all as wanting. It is not logical, but it is often true.
The closest we really get to a message in this episode, and while it's like he says, often true, I don't know that it really has a lot to do with the episode itself. Still, it's a good quote, and will go good on a cross-stitch or something.
Live long, T'Pau, and prosper.
Live long and prosper, Spock.
I shall do neither. I have killed my captain and my friend.
The debut of this phrase on Star Trek, and Spock's answer is very poignant and nicely delivered. And speaking of that...
Don't you think you better check with me first?
Captain! Jim!
This is the first time we've seen Spock emote when he wasn't being influenced by spore monkey spores or Stupid Joe's disease, which is the official name for that, by the way. Now, we just came off of an episode with phenomenal music by Fred Steiner, and holy crap, did Gerald Fried say, "Hold my beer," or what? First, we got Spock's theme, which becomes a staple in the show going forward. In an interview with the Television Academy Foundation, Fried said that he was trying to come up with something that reflects the strange dichotomy of Spock by composing a tender and romantic lyrical line and having it played on an instrument that ain't that great for tender and romantic music, the bass guitar. So it communicates this kind of clunky struggle on Spock's part to reconcile these two halves of his character.
I suppose most of us overlook the fact that even Vulcans aren't indestructible.
No. We're not.
Then we got the Vulcan March. It starts way back in the episode where Spock first talks about the ancient ritual they've created around Farr.
It is the Pon Farr. Time of mating. There are precedents in nature, Captain.
And that's more or less the form we get when the wedding processional comes into the marriage Thunderdome, but it reaches a fevered crescendo during the fight, and this is the one everybody remembers. All of this music captures the severity and harshness of a very ancient culture that still permeates this futuristic and logical people, and it represents, at least to me, the pinnacle of the music of the original series. It is simply outstanding. The Goof. Only a couple of minor things here. One of them is kind of pedantic, but if I mentioned Doric and Tablature in the last episode, I gotta mention this.
My heart is flame. Thee has the power, T'Pau.
Okay, so we're using this archaic grammar to reflect how ancient this whole ritual is. Great, I like that. But if you're gonna do it, you gotta do it right. Thee is the object form of the singular you from early modern English, and thou is the subject form. Spock and T'Pau both use thee for both, and it sounds weird. He says, thee has the power, when he should have said, thou has the power. Okay, yes, it actually should have been thou hast the power, what with the greater Germanic influence on the language back then. Jeez, and you're calling me a stickler. Well, speaking of grammar and being a stickler...
The birds and the bees are not Vulcans, Captain. If they were, if any creature as proudly logical as us...
Even at his horniest, Spock would not use crappy grammar like this. It's as proudly logical as we, because it's an elliptical clause. The full sentence would be as logical as we are. It's really frustrating when dudes what are supposed to talk good make bad sentence usements, you know? What? I'm a possum. Tell me you'd expect more from a Vulcan than you would me, right? Plus, with me, it's all disarming and cute and crap, so, you know, bite me. Finally, and this seems to come up a lot in science fiction, Black Panther comes to mind, but there's lots of other examples. But when you have an advanced society inexplicably adhering to a weirdly brutal and archaic ritual involving fighting to the death to determine something or for some other purpose, it all makes sense that these guys are logical and scientific, but when it comes to marriages, there's a possibility somebody's going to get a lurpa up their colinar. I mean, I get that no one expected T'Pring was going to opt for the Caliphy over here, but that it was still an option and that the big muscle Vulks brought lurpas and Anwoons with them says that it ain't some obscure and forgotten clause in the ritual. I mean, it's literally in the name of the thing, Kun Ut Caliphy, marriage or blood sport. For Klingons, this would make total sense, but what are Vulcans still doing this crap for, you know? Ruminations. We usually do ruminations last, but I want to do the in-universe and philosophical crap first this time. So, this episode basically invents the Vulcans as a people, and just about everything that this episode sets up gets reused in stories about Vulcans to this very day. We got the first look at Vulcan, the planet. Heck, we get the first Vulcans at all what ain't named Spock. And we get the first Vulcan hand salute. It's crazy to think that there's an emoji on your phone right now that is the Vulcan salute, and that this is where that originated. Well, technically, it's a gesture from a Jewish tradition that Leonard Nimoy saw when he was a kid and thought was cool, where the Kohanim, when making a special blessing over the congregation, made their hands like the Hebrew letter Shin, which is the first letter of Shaddai, one of their revered names for God. It's also the first letter in Shalom, or peace. And Nimoy thought that would make an appropriate thing for the Vulcan salute to mean. And we got other Vulcan firsts as well. As I mentioned before, the first time anybody says live long and prosper. And while we've caught a glimpse of Spock's quarters before, this is the first time we've had a really good look at them, and how they resemble all the things we see of his homeworld later on, from the artifacts on the wall down to just the color, look, and feel of the place. Farr comes back not just for Spock in Star Trek III, but in multiple stories across different series. And we establish the Vulcans as a people of tradition and ritual, as we'll continue to see with Spock undergoing Kolinar in the motion picture, and again, Vulcans throughout Star Trek. It's amazing that we've made it this far into the series, and we know more about and have seen more Klingons than we have the race that arguably the show's most popular character is a part of. This ain't really a moral or message episode, except maybe, I don't know, don't make big decisions while you're horny. Theodore Sturgeon's script for this went through a number of iterations. He had all the Vulcan stuff being in the Vulcan language at first, but he also ain't great at making up languages, so what he came up with was pretty goofy. And he also had Spock regress into like a primitive state where he's acting like King Kong. Add those two together, and you got a scene where Spock is beating his chest and yelling, "Kiki knee, Clark!" That ain't an exaggeration. That was literally in Sturgeon's script. Yeah, you can see how that might not have come off as seriously as one would want. Stan was also named Spore, which Bob Justman said, why don't we just call him Sperm? One of the interesting changes they made came at the hands of Dorothy Fontana, and that's bringing in T'Pring's motivations and the whole brutal logic and chess-like maneuvering of the love triangle, where no matter how things turned out, she would have what she wanted. This was a lot of what she wanted to do with L.E.N. in Friday's Child, but Gene didn't allow, so she used that idea for T'Pring. But as much as they had to change of Sturgeon's original script, most of the Vulcan culture stuff, the rituals and formalities, T'Pau being the matriarch and turning down the seat on the Federation Council, that was all Sturgeon. So like with Paul Schneider on Balance of Terror creating the Romulans, Theodore Sturgeon set up a lot of stuff that I bet if you told him back then that they would still be using in 2026, he'd have told you was crazy. And finally, there's a scene that I don't think gets talked about enough when people discuss this episode. And that's this one here, when Chapel is coming in to tell Spock they're on their way to Vulcan.
I had a most startling dream. You were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear you. It would be illogical for us to protest against our natures. Don't you think?
I don't understand.
Your face is wet.
I came to tell you that we are bound for Vulcan.
Miss Chapel.
My name is Christine.
Yes, I know, Christine. Would you make me some of that lo mein soup?
Does it seem like Spock's considering putting the moves on Chapel here? I mean, he's in the middle of a scorching case upon Farr, and he don't know if he's going to make it to Vulcan or not. He knows she's got the hots for him. Before, according to him, it was inappropriate for her to make him some soup, but now he's like, hey, baby, want to get together and make soup? I don't know, maybe he's just trying to be nice after hurling a bowl of soup at her head before, but I don't know. I get the feeling that if Chapel had wanted to, she could have probably gotten the Spockin' she's been fantasizing about, you know? I ain't going to Google it, but I bet you there's a million fanfics out there that elaborate on this scene greatly. Skyrockets on fleek, afternoon plebeic, am I right? Well, there goes my G rating. Anyways, moving on. Production. So I've told you all about Leonard Nimoy's contract renegotiations leading into this season. And what I didn't tell you about, and was waiting for this episode to talk about, was they tried to do this psychological warfare thing with Nimoy where they acted like they was going to replace him as Spock and let slip to Nimoy's agent Alex Brewis a 3-page memo titled Vulcan Possibilities with an A-list, a B-list, and a C-list of people they could get to replace Leonard Nimoy. A list of 39 names, including David Carradine and this guy. Uh-oh. Yep. Stan himself was one of the names on the list, and was actually one of only 2 of the names that was realistically being considered, the other being Mark Lenard, though he was rejected as having too much of a physical presence to play the depth and sensitivity that had been the formula of Nimoy's success. The rest of the list was an attempt to make Nimoy think he was way more replaceable than he actually was, which would be considered in possum culture as a dick move. But all's fair in love and contract negotiations, right? So Larry here was really their plan B if the negotiations with Nimoy collapsed. So they actually optioned the guy, saying he'd get the main cast role, not as Spock, but as another Vulcan, if things went south with Nimoy. But if they didn't, he'd get another beefy guest role. Well, clearly they didn't go south, and this is the consolation prize role he got. Stan. Stan with all of 3 friggin' lines. Well, he was kicking ass at the time with all the roles we've already talked about, like the friggin' Great Escape. A 3-line guest spot on a sci-fi series was a pretty big step back, so he turned it down. So Roddenberry calls the guy at his house and first does the "this role is very important, there's a lot for you to work with here" thing, but closes his please reconsider speech with something along the lines of, if you ever want to work at Paramount again, you're gonna do this role. Montaigne says those wasn't Gene's exact words, but he got that message. Desilu was in the final stages of being bought by Paramount at this time, so Gene wasted no time using the bigger studio's name to make his point. When you add this to the fact that Montaigne wasn't told until he reported to Makeup that he was going to have to shave his chest for the role of Stan, and ended up calling his agent about it, who negotiated with Gene to get him to allow that black turtleneck be added to his costume instead, which Gene was okay with, but it resulted in Montaigne pretty much being put on Gene's shit list. Yeah, I wouldn't ask old Larry what he thinks of the great bird of the galaxy is what I'm saying. Honestly, as someone who's dipped his toe into that world a couple of times, I tend to come down on Larry's side on this. You ain't the production's property, and something like that could affect your ability to take other roles. He should have at least had a heads up. And I'm never going to be okay with somebody telling an actor they'll never work for a studio or whatever again if they don't take a role. With John Drew Barrymore in Alternative Factor, that was different. He had already taken the role and just didn't show up. No, that's a paddling. He got his union card pulled for that, and rightly so. But what happened to Larry was he was told he might get years of regular work, so don't make any plans, but if that don't work out, we'll get you a nice guest role. But instead of a Commander Core or a Khan or a Lazarus level role, they throw him some day player bullshit. Of course he's gonna turn that down. But Gene's gotta get all Johnny Fontaine about it. Bottom line, Larry got a raw deal, and if he has a bad taste in his mouth about it, I don't blame him. But all in all, with a great script by Theodore Sturgeon, his second and final script for the series, his first was Shore Leave, and rewrites by Gene Kuhn, Dorothy Fontana, and Gene Roddenberry, a gorgeous set by Matt Jeffries and lit by Jerry Finneman, particularly that angry and passionate red sky, that killer Gerald Fried score, and great performances by Shatner, Dee Kelly, Celia Lovsky, Majel Barrett, Arlene Martell, Larry Montaigne, what we got of him, and most of all Leonard Nimoy. Amok Time really fires on all cylinders and will always be one of my favorite episodes of any Star Trek series. Truly great stuff. So there you have it, Amok Time. What did you think of this episode? Let me know about it down in the comments down there. If you dug the video, please hit that like button, and if you ain't done so already, hit that subscribe button down there as well. If you're on mobile and it's the first week this thing is up, hit that hype button a few times for me too. No idea if that does anything, but hey, what can it hurt, right? Next time, a mysterious ice cream cone from hell is eating planets and has beat the snot out of a Federation starship and driven its captain insane. Now it's coming after the Enterprise. Sometimes you lick the ice cream cone and sometimes the ice cream cone licks you. Find out which happens to Kirk and crew when we take a look at the Doomsday Machine. Until then, possum friends are awesome friends. Take it easy, all right? Later.
Hey!